One of the beautiful provinces of South Africa is the Western Cape. And no, I don't mean because of the beautiful city of Cape Town, but just the landscape. But one gets to see the beauty of the Western Cape when you drive around that country in the period between August and October each year. And that's the time where canola planting are usually blooming and it's looking awesome across that province. And canola is a new crop in South Africa. We have not always planted canola in this country. We only started planting it at a commercial level in a big way around 1999. And you look at where we are today, we are producing over 311,000 tons of canola. At least that's the crop that is expected for this year. And by the way, if you look at that harvest and you compare with where we were last year, this is set to be a record harvest in the canola production in South Africa. The reason our canola production is increasing is because of the demand on the household. People, some prefer canola oil, others sunflower oil, olive oil, all kinds of things that people use when they cook. But canola is one of the crops that has been doing reasonably well in South Africa, to an extent that we started to see canola planting taking a little bit of an area from wheat, from barley, and it expanding. And I'm mentioning the Western Cape as the province where we usually see this landscape because in South Africa, canola is only grown in large part in the Western Cape. It is a winter crop, and the Western Cape is the only province that is a winter rainfall in South Africa. So we need that rain to actually see the canola planting growing. We're sitting now at a position where, as a country, we are actually a net exporter when it comes to canola. I mean, think about countries like Germany, Belgium. We're exporting a bit of canola to those countries just in this period of a few years. So when I talk about the success crops in South Africa, I know the example we typically make is of soybean planting, where we moved in years around 2014 from 600,000 tons to where we are sitting at today, with about 2.7 million tons of soybean as a country, where we were actually self-sufficient even there. We're no longer importing soybean oil cake. And the reason for the soybean expansion was the demand from the poultry industry. But that success story is not only on the soybean. Canola is just one part of that success story. But if you drove across the country or the Western Cape this year, 2025, you probably did not see the canola blooming in a beautiful way like you did last year and the other years, especially around the Southern Cape. And the reason for that is that while we're expecting a crop that is bigger than last year, a record level, folks struggled a little bit at the start of the season. We heard about the problem of snail infestation, which meant then that farmers had to plant 2 times, 3 times in other regions because they had to apply all kinds of agrochemicals. The key point then about that is that the input costs for the farmers in the Western Cape were pretty much fairly high this time around. So that did put a bit of pressure on some farmers. The weather condition also, there were regions where they have not been as favorable. And I know that in the first week of October, we were continuing to see some rainfall in some region of the Cape, but whatever you are seeing at the time was not necessarily the same situation across the province. There are areas that struggled a bit with the rain. So that rainfall issues here and there, as well as a snail infestation, they did cause some pressures on the farmers. So while you may hear us talking about South Africa having had in 2025-26 an excellent crop, in fact, we now have the second production estimate. I'm looking at those numbers here. And if you combine everything, the canola harvest, wheat, barley, oats, we're pretty much sitting with a solid harvest estimate in here, which is of over 2 million tons of all of South African winter crop. Wheat production is also up, but the wheat crop then is supported more by the increases in the northern parts of the country, provinces like the Free State, Limpopo, even the Northern Cape, which are all under irrigation, while in the Western Cape, we are seeing that the wheat harvest is less than what was produced last year. So this is to mean the Western Cape has had a fair share of its challenges. So even if at the end of the season, we close it with a bigger crop, I think on the farmers' input cost side, they probably had a much more difficult time this year compared with what we saw in the previous season. So a bigger crop, but not everyone is getting richer out there. So I do think that that's something that needs to be contextualized when one is thinking or hearing about the winter crop in South Africa. But I'll tell you what, there are some people that I think they had a fairly better season. The folks in the northern regions of South Africa, those that are in summer grains and the oilseeds, the season was fairly better. I mean, the numbers are there for themselves to look. One, look at the figures, and you see that we pretty much had a solid crop in our maize, soybean, sunflower, and all of those. And whenever we have a good crop in grains, we begin to see that even the interlinked industries, they benefit on that. I'm talking about the tractor sales, combine harvester sale, and some of the farm equipments, because ultimately the farmers get out there and they look and say, okay, we do have a bit of an income. What are some of the implements that we can improve? And if you look at the tractor sales this year, they've actually been increasing since the start of 2025. We have now data in South Africa for about 9 months of 2025, and in all of those months, the tractor sales have been sitting on the positive month by month. There is an issue of a base effect because 2024, the tractor sales were fairly low at the time, were affected by the drought. But looking at these numbers that we have and just aggregating the cumulative figure of 9 months of 2025, and you compare with some of the previous years, we're pretty much sitting nicely above average, which means it is technically even a better year. It is only the combined harvester sales where we saw that in the last 3 months, I'm talking here October, I'm talking here September, August, July, the sales of those particular months, they were pretty much on the negative. But if you aggregate the whole year, we're still sitting with combined harvester sales that are 17% up compared to the first 9 months of 2024. That also then means that overall, the machinery sales space is looking good. And I think those good crops that we harvested in the summer rainfall area supported this. We will not skip the fact that if you think about the interest rates, they've been fairly low this time around. Yes, the rate of replacement is another aspect that farmers have to consider. And I think all of this contributes to these numbers that we are talking about and looking at this time around. But I think ultimately, and this links to the point that we discussed in our previous segment on AgriView, which is that these tractor sales, they also signal the optimism about the year ahead. People are spending and doing all of this because they are optimistic about the season ahead. And we've discussed the season ahead in one of our previous segments, which you could find here in the channel and get a sense of what we are talking about. But ultimately, we are optimistic about the 2025-26 production year for summer grains in South Africa. That season starts now in October. By the time some of you are listening to this, we will be pretty much busy across the country, especially in the eastern regions of South Africa. So that's how we are looking at all things in South Africa, summer grains, as well as on a winter grain side. And I think on a volume perspective, on both of these, the numbers are looking reasonably well. But the picture is not all that well for everyone. Our friends and neighbors in Zimbabwe, they have a fair share of their problems. One of the segments we talked about in here on AgriView was that Zimbabwe has banned the imports of maize. And that our viewpoint was that was a wrong policy proposition, and that the country actually did not have sufficient maize if we were considering what they needed for a year. Because their production, at least according to our estimates, is about 1.3 million tons. And they need to consume about 2 million tons of maize. But they decided that they would block the maize. They had a bit of sufficient maize for themselves for a period. And we said, this is something that will need to be reversed. And that episode 2 is in our channel. But the most important thing, or why I'm presenting this point again here, is because Zimbabwe has actually started buying maize. There's no official communication that they've put out. But if you look at what has been happening in South Africa, in the week of the 26th of September, South Africa exported as a notable volume of maize to the world market. I'm looking at the figures I have here in front of me. And if you look at the volume that South Africa sent to the world that week, was about just under 28,000 tons of maize. And about 47% of that, that's just under 13,000 tons, went to Zimbabwe. So the key question then, is Zimbabwe quietly importing maize, or have they quietly lifted the ban? That's something that we will know in the coming weeks, because there is no official communication that has been sent out. But what we do know is that Zimbabwe is starting to import some maize from South Africa. As to whether then that volume continues or not, we will make a good judgment on that throughout October. We will see on what will happen going to the end of the year. But I think the ultimate point is that we all knew that Zimbabwe doesn't have the sufficient volume of maize to meet its annual needs. And the ban on maize was a policy mistake. And I think that they should continue to buy the affordable maize from South Africa, from Zambia, and from elsewhere in the market to ensure that the consumers there, at least they are sitting in a good position of having the supplies. So folks, I think what I wanted to put forward this week are really these 3 points, which is that the Western Cape doing reasonably well, but the season has not been all that smooth for the farmers. And secondly, the summer grain in South Africa, they're supporting the tractor sales, and these large tractor sales and combined harvester sale, they signal, again, the optimism about the season ahead. And I think the last point is that, is Zimbabwe quietly importing maize, or they've quietly lifted the ban on maize imports? And that's something that we will know more as the time unfolds, and then we will know what's going on in there. And with that, let's stop there. And please subscribe to our channel and continue to listen to some of these segments and spread the word to as many people as you can. Thanks for supporting us.